So what is the deal with Haas? I really feel for these guys, I really do. I think of all the teams on the grid at the moment, Haas have been through more crap easily in the last 4 years than anyone else. Through everything such as dodgy sponsors, pay drivers, nearly having a driver die on them. The team has just been getting into bed with the wrong people, and it's kind of negatively affected their reputation. But I do think Haas deserve a lot more respect than they're currently being shown. The very fact they're still with us is a massive credit to, Gunther Steiner, Gene Haas, and everyone at the team, everyone on the shop floor. If a team full of less dedicated people were there, they would have packed it in and sold up by now. Their one-lap qualifying, particularly with Hulkenberg, has been pretty impressive, but just over a race pace, they've been delivered recently and they've been falling behind and being outdeveloped by the bigger teams with bigger budgets. The thing is, their F1 on the cheap model that they've been using since they started, where they outsource bits and pieces for the cars and the team, on paper that works, but the trouble is they've been bringing in parts from Ferrari who haven't been performing, so as a knock-on effect they suffer, and they're just a complete victim of this, and they just have to kind of ride it out, or maybe start to look at severing ties with Ferrari. Who knows? If Ferrari has troubles with the engine, Haas has troubles with the engine. If they have aero troubles, Haas has aero troubles. It's just a total knock-on effect. And as another gut punch, Haas are the only team on the grid currently who have never had a podium position. Okay, people might say Alfa Romeo haven't had one, but Alfa Romeo is just Sauber with an Alfa badge slapped on it, and Sauber have had plenty of podiums in the past. However, despite all this going on and everything, they are still 8th in the constructors, ahead of Alfa and AlphaTauri. Haas had a great start to the season where everything was fresh. They picked up some decent points, Hulkenberg finishing the highest in 7th, I think it was, and Magnessen picking up the rest. By all rights, AlphaTauri and Alfa Romeo, who have got bigger teams, bigger budgets, and have outdeveloped them, should easily have surpassed them now, but they've been doing just such a bad job that Haas have managed to just hang in there. Just as I mentioned bigger teams, okay, so as it currently works out, Haas have around 300 employees. The next one up, Alfa Romeo, with 400. So that just explains the gap. And just to put this into perspective, Mercedes have 1,200 employees, Red Bull have 1,000. In the grand scheme of things, they're doing pretty well considering that huge gulf in between. I think the only chance Haas has for this season, unfortunately, is just to luck into some points positions if there's an absolutely catastrophic race and there's lots of retirements. I mean, there's no denying that Haas are still suffering financially, but also on a reputation level from their absolutely horrific sponsorship deals with Rich Energy and Uralkali in previous seasons. A small team like Haas is always on the hunt for a title sponsor, and if one comes along, big or small, you're going to listen to them. When Rich Energy came along and Uralkali came along, they were in a dire financial situation, and in this case, it's really any port in a storm. Unfortunately, with Rich Energy, probably one of the dodgiest sponsors I've ever seen in Formula One, run by this beardy weirdy guy who we've never heard of but claims to be one of the biggest drinks companies in the world. And he cancelled that mid-season due to poor performance. I mean, what was he really expecting? Maybe Grosjean to stop crashing, though that could have been the problem. And then after that, they were in even more financial trouble, where they had to pick up 2 pay drivers just to keep the lights on at the factory and keep everyone employed and the team running. I mean, for most teams, picking up just 1 pay driver is an enormous risk and a setback, but to pick up 2 at the same time, but this gamble didn't pay off. They finished rock bottom of the table, their worst performance so far with no points. Mick Schumacher and Mazepin were absolutely nowhere, crashing more cars than in the Blues Brothers. And it does raise questions with some of the more dodgy sponsors we've seen in Formula One in recent years. I guess what it depends on is your level of need and due diligence, and it just goes up and down. And another thing since they've started is Haas have never really had that consistent, stable driver that all the team can pull behind and drive on with. They've never had that up-and-coming driver who is then plucked up to Ferrari or Red Bull or Mercedes or McLaren. They've always had those kind of hand-me-down drivers, the ones that kind of weren't good enough for the big teams or were booted out, and Haas kind of saw them as a little bit of a bargain, used them to pick up their knowledge. Or they've had the kind of drivers where they're told, we'll give you this big pile of cash if you put the driver in the car. And as a result, Haas has their fan base and everything. I've been to a fair few motorsport events and F1 events, and I've never seen anyone wearing any Haas F1 caps or shirts or merchandise or anything. I may be wrong, but that's just what I've seen. And where do I start with Drive to Survive on Netflix? In my opinion, Haas are the absolute highlight of Drive to Survive. It's made a cult icon of Günther Steiner. Honestly, you can go onto the Haas website and get yourself a Günther Steiner t-shirt. Honestly, if you want some solid entertainment, just make a playlist of all the Haas episodes on Drive to Survive and just watch them. Absolutely brilliant. But what we saw with Günther Steiner that we hadn't before is just the pure and utter frustration that seems to be happening when a driver isn't performing, and the team principal's view to this. When they're interviewed about it on TV, there's always some, PR stuff spouted out, but what Drive to Survive showed us was the conversations that can really be had. And I know they doll it up a lot on that series and they create a lot of things that don't happen, but I think what was going on at Haas was really the case. With this season and everything, it's going to be interesting to see how they're portrayed in the upcoming series. But with everything behind them now, we look towards the future. And I think they've actually got a bright one ahead of them. They've now secured MoneyGram as a title sponsor moving forward, which is a great result for them. It's a company that people have actually heard of. It's a company that people actually use. And that is just not what they've had in the past. It's not confirmed, I don't think, but there's some discussion around them partnering with Alfa Romeo moving forward, as they're going to ditch Sauber, as Sauber are now going over to Audi. Hulk and Magnessen are both contracted for next year as well, which is a first for Haas, because in the last few years they've only signed up their drivers after the season has ended or a few weeks before the season even starts. So if you're working back at the factory or having any part of Haas, you're going to be thinking, what the hell's going on? What's the plan? So now actually there's a long-term solution and they know what they're doing, and that's got to be such a relief for the team. Hulkenberg and Magnussen are probably the most stable driver pairing that they've ever had. I'm not saying Hulkenberg and Magnussen are amazing drivers, I'm just saying that this is the stablest pairing that they've had in all of their time in F1, and that's saying something about their previous lineups. With Grand Prix they may be finishing at the back of the grid, but at least they're finishing and not parking the cars into barriers or gravel traps. I think Haas have learned from their mistakes in the past, and what they're doing with their 300-ish people back at Banbury, and they've got their other locations in the USA and Italy as well. I think they're doing a fantastic job with their resources, and when the extra money starts coming in from MoneyGram, Alfa Romeo as well, hopefully that'll just add to them. What they've been doing with such a small budget is so impressive, so if you increase that, hopefully we'll start to see them move up the grid a bit. But then imagine if Andretti gets confirmed for the grid, we could see a Haas versus Andretti rivalship, and that would be something. 2 American teams on the grid, and who would have thought that would ever happen? There's going to be a competition of who is the more American, and I'm really looking forward to that actually. I do think Haas are going to try and do it the more European way, but I can expect Andretti to be a bunch of good old boys. I think Haas are going to have a better 2024 than a couple of teams on the grid, especially look at Sauber for next year, but they're looking very shonky at the moment. And even someone such as Alpine, who are just all over the place at the moment. There doesn't seem to be any direction there, and I can see them falling off massively next year. So there we go. Haas, all is forgiven, and I think you'll be in a decent position for next year. But I'd love to see what you guys think. Please put a comment below. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I'm Paul, and thanks so much for watching.